by thorns. And the head itself is, you can see, a peculiar shape. It's got a big back end and a long, thin front end that goes in amongst the trees at the top, sticks out this tongue, takes them off very delicately, and also those lower teeth against the top palate. If they just take some leaves and put them in there, and then move their heads back, then they just strip that entire branch. And all of those leaves then end up in the mouth.
So in terms of its teeth, do we have a look at those in more detail? Because, I mean, the way it gets its nutrition out of these nutritious acacia leaves is just by grinding and chewing and grinding, mixing it with saliva, swallowing it and bringing it back up again to do the same. So, I mean, its teeth are absolutely critical to it getting the best out of its food.
And, you know, the upper and lower teeth have to fit perfectly.
We see that better on these skulls, can't we, which is quite good. So this is a big male.
Yep,
okay, it's adult.
Big adult male, old male.
Okay. So this is upper jaw, obviously. And these are these grinding surfaces. And they're incredibly sharp, aren't they?
They are, and they cut as much as they grind, of course. You can, these little ridges, these crescent-shaped ridges on the top, cut the leaf. And then once the leaf is in that little hollow in between there, that's when it gets crushed.
And how many hours a day would it be eating and grinding up its food and chewing the cud?
A lot. Will probably be, I would think, half the day that you're spending out there. That's of 24 hours, probably 12 hours a day. It is nibbling away at trying to get this food into its
wow, that is amazing.
Here we go. Now we're seeing the guts for the first time.
The giraffe is a mega herbivore. Like hippos and elephants, it consumes huge amounts of vegetation, but confines itself to small leaves. Although it's a large animal, the guts for processing this food are surprisingly compact.
We've got all the digestive system now here on the dissecting table. This end, the big bit, is the stomach, essentially, well, the four stomachs, which then flows out into the intestines, which Richard's working on at the moment. I mean, if we get a little bit of this here that we can take Joy, I don't know whether you can grab a bit of this as well, but if I pass that one over there, here we go. So we have got an incredibly long small intestine.
Compare this to the guts of the elephant.
Can you stand back, please?
In this animal, we see the consequence of a junk food diet, compared to the more discerning gourmet diet of a giraffe. Giraffes' intestines are much longer and thinner because they digest more slowly, extracting every last bit of goodness from their food.
And what it's going to produce at the end are these very small little pellets. You can squeeze one out of here, right, Alan? There we go. A fresh one. So this passes out, but the other good stuff has already been absorbed at this point, and all the water has been reclaimed. After all, these animals are living in a very arid environment, so they can't afford to lose water. So they have a very efficient way of reclaiming all of that water so they can then send it back as saliva and start the process all over again.
So out of the giraffe, we've taken out its digestive system. Its four big stomachs are still on the table here, but we're going to move on from this to go deeper inside the animal to look at its vital organs.
This is where the stomach was, and most of the space of this chest was taken up by the stomach, so there's not much space for heart and lungs. And the problem is that a big animal like this needs a lot of air to provide the oxygen. Compared to us, we take in about half a litre of breath. This animal has to take about 30 times that, up to 15 litres of breath. And it's got another complication, which is this long tube down which all the air has to come before it'll reach the lung. That adds another 3 litres of volume that it has to breathe before it gets anything into the chest. So maybe we should try and do that and see whether we can get it to blow up.
Can we get, you've got the air? Excellent, okay, brilliant.
Okay, so we've got this in, and we're ready to go. Yep.
Whoa, look at that.
Look at that.
That's dramatic. Wow, that is truly spectacular.
This would have been the dome where the diaphragm was and the stomach. Keep going, a little bit more.
We're going to hit the sharp edges of the ribs, Graham.
That's okay. And the ribs would have been like that, and so you can see that the lung bulges up into where the ribs would have been, and it fills this whole space. Every single time it breathes, that's what it has to do.
So that's the shape of the diaphragm, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Underneath, that is extraordinary.
And then when you breathe out, this stuff is full of elastic tissue. And so when you let the air out, you'll see that the lung just collapses. We're not sucking air out of it now, it just collapses on itself as the elastic tissue that we stretched contracts down and expels all of that air.
That's so amazing.
What about when it's running, though? This is at rest. You've got this huge animal that must require masses of energy to be able to run, to shift such a giant.
Yes.
It's going to breathe faster, but is this an animal that tires really quickly because it's just
tire.
simply not an athlete?
But how does it take in more and to expel it more quickly is a kind of mystery, because these ribs are very stiff. It's not as if they can lift their ribs the same way as we can. And it's probably related to movement of the intestines up and down against the diaphragm as they gallop. So when they gallop and put their front feet on the ground, when the front feet hit the ground, all of these intestines hit against the diaphragm. And that pushes the air out. And then when they go on, rock onto their back legs, then the intestines move back, and of course then the diaphragm can contract quite easily.
So this is a piston.
This is a piston. Beautifully done. Couldn't be more beautifully designed. Evolved.
We get used to the idea that evolution is so good at producing beautiful, elegant animals that look as though they've been designed. We forget that sometimes they're not perfect and there are imperfections. And the imperfections are very revealing, because they're exactly the kind of imperfections you'd expect from the accidents of history if there were no designer. There's a nerve called the recurrent laryngeal, which runs from the brain, and its end organ is the larynx, and you think it would just go straight there. But in a human, what it does is goes down into the chest, loops around one of the main arteries in the chest, and then goes straight back up again. Obviously a ridiculous detour. No engineer would ever make a mistake like that.
In our bodies, the laryngeal nerve takes a circuitous route, but what happens in an animal with a neck as long as this? It's one of the great evolutionary enigmas that Richard Dawkins is keen to resolve in the flesh.
Interestingly, it's never been dissected out, or only once before has it ever been dissected out in its full length, and that was in 1838.
Don't cut it at this crucial moment.
Oh, well, I'm too good an anatomist for that. You have to trust me now. What I'm actually holding here is the beginning of that nerve. It actually starts out not as a separate nerve, but as a branch coming off of a bigger nerve called the vagus nerve. And this is going to keep running all the way down the body. So you'll see it again over here, all the way down the neck on both sides. So you can see it again right there.
Yes.
And this is going to wrap around the great vessels coming out of the heart. So here it is wrapping around that, and then it continues right there. So here's the vagus going down, and here's the vagus continuing.
Right.
And right over here, there's a branch right there. So it's looping and it's coming back, it's doing a U-turn all the way down here. So it's traveled that entire distance to make a U-turn to go all the way back up again. And so now we could follow it going back up again. So we follow this branch, and if we look, we see it again over here. Here it is, like that. And here you see it going up. This is the voice box, the larynx, and so you can see it going right into the back of the larynx here. And as it innervates this area, it controls the muscles that then control making sounds, but also coordinating breathing and swallowing in this area. So this is a very important nerve. Interestingly, where it ends is pretty close to where it started. It started here, coming out of the brain. It really only needed to go about 2 inches.
Yes, amazing.
But it went all the way down and came all the way back.
Yes. That's a beautiful example of historical legacy as opposed to design.
Exactly. This is not an intelligent design. An intelligent design would be to go from here to here.
Yes.
It does kind of beg the question, though, that even in an animal that might have been many millions of years ago with its head down here, why the route round the blood vessels, unless there was a reason that they were there to innovate something else?
Well, that was in earlier ancestors. Then it was the most direct route in fish.
So it's just inherited.
It's a historical legacy. It's
Fish really don't have much of a neck.